I am blonde, and you know why they don't give blondes a coffee break, right? Because then you have to retrain them. But I finally remembered to turn on the microphone without the sound booth having to wave at me. So finally got that part figured out. Good evening. So I asked, because he mentioned the activity or the fellowship at the Blue Ocean. I thought that sounded like a restaurant, but I asked just to make sure, so I'm sure, I don't know, is it any better, are you close enough to the ocean that it's any fresher than anywhere else here? Is it about the same? About the same. So it just kind of depends. So it's kind of interesting. Where I used to live, where my in-laws live, we used to live there for a while, but there was a seafood restaurant that I think the food tasted fresher and better there than it did if you go to Myrtle Beach or Wilmington or someplace right by the ocean. It was really good. So I hope you have an enjoyable time, and hope your waitress pays attention to you. Not like the fellow that I heard about that he went to the same place regularly, and he was trying to work up the nerve to ask the waitress out for a date, and he kept trying to get her attention. She kept ignoring him, and finally he just stood up and followed her back into the kitchen. And she's like, "Can I help you?" And he said, "Yeah, I was wondering if you'd be willing to go out on a date with me." And she's like, "Yeah, sure." And he's kind of shocked. He said, "Well, you seem to be kind of avoiding me, didn't want to make eye contact." She said, "Yeah, I know. I just thought you wanted more coffee." So anyway, hopefully you get coffee or tea or whatever you need and you have a great time together. I would love it if it worked out, if we could come back again. And I appreciate all of your kindness. You've been very kind in making me feel like part of the family. But I hope you understand what I mean when I say this. Hopefully you don't need this forever. Hopefully you get on track for finding out who the Lord has to be your pastor and your long-term shepherd, and that's not an open-ended thing. But having been through it ourselves, we understand the need and some of the intricacies of that, and we're certainly praying that the Lord will send the right man here. All right, 2 Peter is where we're going to be tonight. Last Sunday night we looked at 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. And like precious faith and all things that pertain to life and godliness. Well, tonight we're going to look at the next section here, 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 9 or 10. We'll see how far we get the time that we have. Okay? So I want to concentrate on this thought this evening with the Lord's help. This is not revolutionary. This is not original. This is not going to blow your socks off, but I do think it's foundational Bible truth, and that is this. If I were to give this message a title, it would be this: we're saved to serve. The old expression, some folks just sit, soak, and sour. And that's not what God intended us to do after we get saved. God intended us to serve, and we see that here in 2 Peter chapter 1. In verses 1 through 4, it talks about we have like precious faith, equally valuable and important faith as any of the apostles or other believers. And God has given us, verse 3, His divine power has given us all things that pertain to life and godliness. So God's given us everything that we need to live for Him. All right? Verse 4 talks about the promises that we've been given. Then we pick up in verse 5. Besides this, besides what? That phrase there, besides this, really kind of means for this reason or therefore. You got the groundwork laid in verses 1 through 4. You have salvation. You have everything that you need that pertains to life and godliness. You have great and precious promises. Therefore, here's how you ought to act on it. All right, so that's what we have here in verse 5, besides this. All right, what's the next step? Besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness, to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness charity. For if these things be in you and abound, they make you that ye shall neither be barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. But he that lacketh these things is blind and cannot see afar off, and hath forgotten that he was purged from his old sins. Wherefore the rather, brethren, give diligence to make your calling and election sure, for if you do these things, ye shall never fail. All right, so let's go back now to verse number 5. Besides this, because of everything that's already been mentioned, giving all diligence, add to your faith. I want you to see, number 1, the command to grow. That's what we see here in this phrase, add to your faith. Now, you can look at it and, you may think, well, I've been out of grammar class long enough. I don't want to have to think about if this is a subject or a verb or a direct object or anything like that. But the verb add here, what kind of verb is it? In grammar class, we call that an imperative. It's a command. Okay? Add to your faith. This is a command that has a sense of urgency with it, just like get on it, do it now kind of a thing. Add to your faith virtue. So, chapter 1, verse 1 says we have obtained faith, like precious faith. And now verse 5 says that's not the end, that's the beginning. We're to add to our faith. Okay? This word add has the idea of to minister nourishment or to provide for. In a civic sense, this word was sometimes used of a benefactor who would fund a public event, like maybe they would fund the parade or they would fund the orchestra that would put on concerts in the city park or something like that. But this also has the sense of, to minister nourishment, or in other words, to feed it so it can grow. Colossians 2:19 talks about Christ being the head, and it says, from which all the body, by joints and bands, having nourishment ministered, grows. Okay? So it's the idea of feeding. This is garden season, and we have good old, I grew up in central Georgia, and I never had a pair of white socks. I always had orangish red socks, from all the red clay. I thought that was unique to Georgia, and then I moved to the Carolinas and found out we got just as much of it in the Carolinas too. Our yard where we live is red clay. So if you want to grow anything, you got to really work at it to get the soil to cooperate. And we've tried. My wife's put in a lot of time on it. We haven't gotten everything just right. But, if you plant the seeds, whether you got red clay like I do, or whether you got nice brown dirt, which I thought that was fiction until I went to the Midwest and saw, hey, there really is nice brown, almost black dirt. Whether you got sandy soil, you don't just have to have dirt, you got to have the right nourishments, right? If your soil is too acidic, certain things will grow well and certain things won't, and if it's too neutral or base, other things. So you got to work with it. I mean, some of you probably have it all down, or I'm going to do this and this and this. For me, if it's not 10-10-10 or Miracle Grow, I'm not real sure. I got to go ask somebody that knows more about it than me. But those are forms of fertilizer, right? That's giving nutrients or nourishment that the plant needs to grow. I'm going to give it the right kind of fertilizer. The couple that was here this morning, they got the little girls at Bella, is that right? The little girl's about 3 or 4 weeks old. Well, they were ministering nourishment to her during the service. I told them afterwards I was greatly impressed at how quiet she was. I don't think any of our kids were that quiet from 30 seconds after they were born on. But they were giving her the bottle, and she was taking it down just fine. You know what that is? That's ministering nourishment. It's providing the nutrients that are needed to grow. So here when it says add to your faith, that phrase add to has the idea of to minister or to provide nourishment. Okay? So in other words, the growth doesn't just happen by itself. We have to work at it. I think sometimes that's one of the big misunderstandings in the Christian life is it's though, you can just put everything on cruise control and everything will be all right. If we're going to become more godly, we got to work at it. If we're going to increase in our faith, if we're going to increase in pleasing the Lord, it requires effort. Just like you don't just chuck the seed in the ground, come back in 60 days and expect tomatoes or cucumbers or green beans or whatever you're growing. You got to work at it and fertilize it and pull the weeds and protect the plants. And then when you get these summertime thunderstorms, hope that it doesn't break it all off. But this idea of add to your faith is to provide for, to provide the right environment, provide the right nutrients, if I could say it that way. So, we are to add to our faith. So getting saved is the baseline. Add to our faith what? Beside this, giving all diligence, add to your faith, and then you got a list of characteristics. Virtue, knowledge, temperance. All right, that's the first three. Virtue. So faith is is used a couple of different ways in the New Testament. Sometimes it's used of that act of complete trust. Okay, but other times the faith refers to the body of revealed doctrine. But add to your faith, in this case, your add to your faith has the idea of you have that relationship with Jesus Christ that's been established by faith. Now you need to grow in that relationship. This word virtue means, moral excellence or exceptional character. So add to your faith virtue. In other words, right character, uprightness, and the character that will abide by your word and do what's right when nobody's watching. That's the idea of virtue. This same word is used in 1 Peter chapter 2, where it says, 1 Peter 2:9, you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of Him. Literally the excellences of Him or the virtues of Him who's called you out of darkness. That's that same term there. But add to your faith virtue. Now let me ask you this. Is virtue an outward action that people can see? Not really. Virtue is character. It's inward. And the first couple of things on the list, add to your faith. Again, faith is a heart issue. That's an inward area. And then virtue is that excellence of character and that moral purity and that kind of a thing. Again, it's inward choices that are eventually going to manifest themselves or show up in our outward actions. But here you have add to your faith virtue, courage, the courage to do what's right, whether it's popular or not. So you have matters of the heart. And then you have, after that, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue, knowledge. You ever been around somebody that really, really wanted to help? They had all kinds of energy and they had all kind of desire to help, and they had absolutely no idea what was going on? If you've ever tried to have your kids help with a project, depending on their attitude, either you got to kind of cajole them or threaten them into helping, or, like the 2-year-old, they want to help mama, which means it's going to take twice as long to get it done, right? Or they're going to help daddy fix it, and it's going to take twice as long. But they got all kinds of energy, and they have no idea what to do. Now, isn't it nice when they get a little bit older, and they not only you want them to help, but they know what to do, so it actually is a help, and it gets done faster? Okay, that's the difference between being a baby Christian and wanting to do something for the Lord or wanting to do things right, but okay, now what do I do? How do I do it? Add to your faith knowledge. This word knowledge is what you would think it is. There's different words in the New Testament for knowledge, but this is kind of the basic word that has the idea of understanding or learning things about how this is supposed to work. Okay, so I'm to add to my faith virtue, a commitment to do what's right, and an excellence of character and purity. But then I've got to learn more about how am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to serve the Lord? What am I supposed to do? So I got to add knowledge. Now, some of you have, probably been, gaining knowledge twice as long as I've been alive. But, the reality is we're never going to have all the knowledge we need. There's a temptation to get to a certain point in life and think, okay, I know everything I need to know. You don't, I don't, especially when it comes to the Bible. But here we're to add to our faith knowledge. Okay? Which means we've got to continue to grow. Just about the time you get to the point where you've got knowledge base accumulated, you know what starts working better? Your forgetter. So then I got to keep adding knowledge. It may not be new. I just got to remember that I know it, if that makes sense. Yeah, I've heard this before. I just forgot about this. So I got to add to my faith virtue, and then to virtue knowledge. Again, these are internal things. Then we start with the outward evidences. Giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance. This word temperance literally has the idea of, to hold in or to keep under control. It's the idea of self-control. It's, when you're looking for the shortest checkout line at the grocery store or Walmart, and you just about spotted it, and then somebody cuts right in front of you, and they've got a huge full basket, and you got 4 or 5 things. Okay, temperance is holding in what you want to say right there. Temperance is holding in that urge to blare the horn just because you don't like what the driver in front of you or beside you is doing. Right? Or in more serious matters, temperance is saying no. That's not pleasing to the Lord. That's not right when temptation comes across our path. Or when an opportunity to do something that sounds good but would require a moral compromise. It's saying no to those things. But the idea of temperance is self-control. Okay? Or to hold it in. There's a sad reality in life, and that's this. You cannot say yes to everything and everybody. You can't. Some people have no problem with that. Okay? The flip's also true. You can't say no to everything forever. But, some people have no problem with that. But, there are times when you want to say yes to everybody or everything, and you don't want to offend people, or you don't want them to be mad at you or whatever. But the reality is, you cannot say yes to everything that comes across your path. I mean, look at Joseph. Did he have an opportunity to have a relationship with Potiphar's wife? Yeah, he did. And he could have said, well, she's going to be mad at me, and this is my boss's wife. But you can't say yes in that situation because there's a higher consideration, and that is the God who sees and the God who says what's right and wrong. But that self-control means, okay, even though I want fourths on dessert, I have to say no. Even though I'd love to have a job that pays double salary, I'm not going to Timbuktu, Alaska, where the closest church of a Bible preaching church is 3-hour snowmobile ride away. It's not worth the increased salary for the damage it would do to my family. You understand what I'm saying? So temperance or self-control is saying yes when I need to say yes and saying no when I need to say no, and not just giving in to all the impulses of the flesh or the things that come along. I thought I would eventually get to the point where I might outgrow some of that. And here's what I've learned, my own experience and talking to folks with more experience than me, you never outgrow that. I mean, there's a reason they run 30-minute infomercials at 2 in the morning. Because somebody's up, can't sleep, and you got to control that impulse or things start showing. Well, my dad had chemo. It messed with his sleep cycle and everything. And there were things that would show up at their house, and he would honestly have no recollection of ever ordering it. He'd be sitting up in the chair watching some infomercial for something at 3 in the morning, and he'd pick up the phone and dial it and put in his card number. I don't know. I mean, I give him a pass on that. We'll blame it on the drugs. But, the reality is you can't buy everything at the store. You can't say yes to every opportunity. You can't do everything all the time. So self-control is having the goals and focus that God wants you to have, saying yes and no to the things that ultimately help us to accomplish what pleases the Lord. That's temperance. All right, and then what's after temperance? Verse number 6, after temperance is patience. Now, this word patience is the same one that we find in James chapter 1, where it says, the trying of your faith worketh patience. I mean, sometimes we think of patience in the sense of long-suffering or putting up with. In this case, the emphasis of this particular word for patience is the idea of to bear up under. I mean, I don't know, some of you know each other better than I know most of you, probably all of you. I'm sure there's somebody here that just thrives on a challenge and thrives on pressure. But the natural response for most people when we get under a difficult situation, under a lot of pressure, is, hey, I want to get out from under this. Right? Get me out from under this pressure. The word patience here has the idea of remaining under. In other words, bearing the burden, staying with it, plodding ahead and trudging forward, doing what's right, and bearing up under that load and burden and responsibility. That's the idea of patience. The Bible many times talks about patience being necessary because many of the rewards for God's children are in the future, right? Have you received crowns from the Lord yet? No. When are those available? In the future. And our eternal reward we sometimes talk about in heaven, when is that? In the future. And so there's patience and a long view required to just bear up under the responsibility. You know what? That is something that we have to make ourselves do. Remember we said add to your faith as a command? Well, adding virtue is something you have to work at. Good character and moral excellence doesn't come automatically. We've got to cultivate it. Well, adding self-control, we've got to work at it. You know what else we've got to work at? Patience. That idea of bearing up under the burden. Add to your and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness. Godliness is acting like, sounding like God. You say, well, how do I do that? The same way that you open your mouth and your mama comes out. You ever had that happen? You say something and you realize, man, I sound just like Mama or Daddy or Uncle Wayne or whoever, you know. You spend time around them, they rub off on you, and then you begin to imitate it consciously or not. Godliness is to do those things that would please the Lord. It is to act like Him. I didn't think this was very funny. My wife did, but a few years ago, somebody at church told my wife, "You've been married to Matthew too long." Why is that? Well, you sound just like him. Well, I promise you she wasn't doing that on purpose. It's just that I have worn her down. I mean, I have rubbed off on her. Okay? She said something that was the same way I would have made a comment in a certain situation. That wasn't intentional, but how does that happen? By spending time around one another, by listening, by being influenced by. How are you influenced by the things of God? I'll give you a hint. It's not CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, CBS, NBC, ABC. It's none of those. It's here, right? It's being around God's people. It's having that kind of input and the choice to follow that. But we're to add godliness, and then we're to add brotherly kindness. Now it's interesting, there in verse 7, you have brotherly kindness and charity. Those are two of the two main New Testament words for love. Brotherly kindness is from the word where we get Philadelphia. You know, because Philadelphia, the root word means brotherly love. Okay, now Philadelphia is more the city of brotherly shove than brotherly love, right? But that's the idea of brotherly kindness or brotherly love. It's the way that, you know, siblings can fight with each other, but if somebody else picks on them, they immediately stick up for each other. Or maybe when they finally outgrow some of that and they learn to appreciate each other and look out for each other and love each other, that brotherly kindness. Well, that is contrasted with the word charity. The word charity is the word agape, which is used in the New Testament of godly love very often. That's more of a love of choice. John 3:16 says, God so loved the world that He gave. You know, that wasn't a feeling. That was a decision. That was a choice. I'm going to put their interests above everything else. And so we're to add both. We're to add that brotherly kindness, which sometimes has to do with those family feelings of whether it's responsibility or love and care and concern, but also that godly love, that charity, that you go to 1 Corinthians 13 and see that charity is, if I could sum it up in one phrase, unselfish, seeks the good of others above our own. Now, of the things that we've just mentioned here, knowledge of the things of God, excellent character or virtue, self-control, temperance, patience, bearing up under a load, godliness, brotherly love, charity or godly love. How many of those come naturally to our flesh? 0. It doesn't just automatically happen. That's why this whole series started with a command, add to your faith. It's not natural to your flesh. It's something that we have to work at with the Lord's help. Now, some of you are, I'm sure, better than me at getting things to grow, right? Whether it's squash or tomatoes or whatever. But you still have to work at it. You have to water it, and you have to weed it, and you have to fertilize it, and you have to do your best to keep the rabbits and the deer and the other predators out. But are you tending your faith in the same way? Are you fertilizing it and watering it and protecting it and seeking the right environment for it to grow? That's a command here. The command is, because we have all things that pertain to life and godliness, now we're to take that and use it to grow. Now, so you have, number one, the command for growth. Number two, I want you to see with me our concern towards growth. I see this in verse 5 and again in verse 10. Verse 5, beside this, now this phrase I've skipped over that I'm coming back to now, giving all diligence. All right, you drop down to verse 10, you see it again. Wherefore the rather, brethren, give diligence to make your calling and election sure. Our concern, I see the idea of concern in the word diligence. The word diligence means, in this case, earnestness. So, to be zealous about completing your task. It's kind of like me when I started yesterday morning. I mean, I had, about 3 or 4 hours worth of stuff that had to be done outside, and I was getting, I was working by the job, not by the hour, so I want to get it done so I can go inside and not trying to stretch it out as long as possible. And there's a zeal. I want to get this finished. I want to get it knocked out. I want to go sit down inside where it's cool. There's an earnestness. Now, if I hire a helper to help me, there isn't always the same earnestness or zeal. But the idea of diligence is that consistent effort. In Aesop's fables, you have the fable about the tortoise and the hare, okay, the turtle and the rabbit. Which one of those two showed diligence? The turtle, because he just plodded and plugged away and stayed at it and stayed at it and stayed at it. The rabbit was faster. We could say it this way, he might have been more talented, but he didn't give the right kind of effort. He was lazy. And here, diligence includes both an earnestness and a dedication that I'm just going to stay at it, stay at it, stay at it. Now, I know there's all kinds of ways to do this, but a good way for me to think about diligence is, a knife sharpener. If I'm going to do it by hand, I got the little, tool, I got the grindstone, I got the little tool, and I'm just going to, whetstone or the little tool. How many times am I going to have to take that knife back and forth across there to get a good edge? I'm not counting. Dozens, maybe a couple hundred. That's diligence. That's just staying after it. It's not flashy, it's not fast, but it is faithful. Where you see our concern is that we should be giving all diligence. I mean, that's the difference between somebody that throws some seeds in a cup because it's a school class project to see a seed germinate and grow, or somebody that really wants to grow vegetables. And they're going to till the ground and fertilize it and stay after it and work it. That's the idea of diligence, but you see the concern. If you were in sales, if that was your line of work and you were in sales and your company offered, let's just say you sell whatchamacallits, okay? And your company offers, if you sell 2,000 units, you get a $100,000 bonus. You think that would make you more diligent, zealous, earnest about selling 2,000 units? I don't know, maybe some of you don't need it, okay? But Savannah's nodding yes. She could use the money, and I could too, okay? So, if it's like, okay, here's an incentive that gives you that repeated, consistent, zealous effort. Is serving the Lord worth more or less than a $100,000 bonus? So yeah, we know the right answer, but then you know what the follow-up's going to be, right? Are we giving the same kind of effort and attention to growing in our faith and walking with the Lord as we would if we were offered a big bonus for sales? That's the concern for growth. And then number 3, I want you to see with me the consequences of ignoring spiritual growth. The consequences of ignoring spiritual growth. Verse 8 says, if these things be in you and abound, they make you that ye shall neither be barren nor unfruitful. That term barren actually has the idea of lazy or unproductive. And unfruitful, again, has the idea of unproductive. So it's two synonyms, two similar ways of saying the same thing. If you are being diligent, you will be fruitful. If you are not, you will be barren or unfruitful. Verse 9. He that lacketh these things is blind and cannot see afar off, and has forgotten that he was purged from his old sins. This word blind is the common word in the New Testament for blind. It was used of the blind man when Jesus healed him. But this can also refer to a mental blindness as well. You ever heard this phrase, hey, they've got a blind spot about this issue? What do we mean by that? They do not recognize what's going on. They don't perceive the reality of the situation. They have a blind spot about this situation. And here, Peter does not say if you don't grow, you'll lose your salvation. That's not what it says. But what it says here is if you are not growing in your walk with the Lord, you can get to the point where you're blind and cannot see afar off. That idea of cannot see afar off is the idea of to see dimly, or in other words, very poor eyesight. It's the idea, similar concepts there, and hath forgotten that he was purged from his old sins. It doesn't say you lost your salvation, but rather a faith ignored can lead to a faith questioned. Am I really saved? I mean, could I have gotten to this point and not really be saved? Well, it can happen, yeah, when someone backslides, gets away from the things of the Lord. But is that a position of confidence? I'm forgotten if I'm I don't know if I'm saved or not. I'm not really sure. Is that kind of person going to be a good witness for the Lord? Is that kind of person going to be serving in different areas in the church? No. Is that kind of person going to be, a good mentor, a good example? No. If you get to the point where your faith, shrivels and doesn't grow, then it's barren and unfruitful. There's no production. There's no positive result for the things of the Lord. I've known a few people in my life that I think were in that condition. They thought maybe they weren't saved. They thought maybe they need to get saved again. The reality was, or get saved, the reality was they had just ignored spiritual growth to the point that it was almost indiscernible from watching them if they were saved or not. But if we ignore spiritual growth, we get to the point that we're blind and cannot see afar off. Now, I hope that's not the case for any of you here, anybody you know, but I think we can understand that concept. If somebody can't see far off, can they function independently? Not very well. They got to have help, right? And they can't do a lot for themselves. They get frustrated, and then they end up, in some cases, folks that have to have a lot of help, they end up just kind of what I call turtling. They withdraw in their shell because they don't like asking for help all the time, so they just sit and don't accomplish much, and then you're still in that cycle of being unfruitful. Verse 10, here's the contrast to that. You have the negative side of it, lacking these things. Verse 10, wherefore the rather, brethren, give diligence to make your calling and election sure, for if you do these things, you shall never fall. So rather give diligence to make your calling and election sure doesn't mean that I got to help God. Just rather it means the idea of to be sure is the same term that we see in Hebrews where it says we have an anchor of the soul, sure and steadfast. To make our faith sure has the idea of it being firm, to be established, to be strong and growing. So my faith can either be firm and established in a walk with God, or it can be shaky and uncertain and wobbly because I don't even remember anymore. I've kind of neglected it to the point I'm not real sure. For if you do these things, you shall never fall. I don't think that means we'll never sin, but rather we're not going to fall into a condition of, if we're growing, we're not going to fall into a condition of a consistent backslidden lifestyle. So where would you rather be? Would you rather be growing and fruitful? Or would you rather be, withered and rotting away on the vine? I know which one I'd rather be. And I think I know which one you'd rather be. That's why you're here on a Sunday night in the middle of the summer. But it's just a reminder to me that beside this, giving all diligence add to your faith, it requires our constant attention. It requires constant effort on our part. It requires that we can't just, put it on ignore, put it on coast, and think that our Christian life will take care of itself. We got to continue to put in time and effort and work at our walk with the Lord. Now, remember, this is all on the foundation of verse 3. According as His divine power hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness through the knowledge of Him that called us to glory and virtue. We're to put effort into this, but God's given us what we need. And when we depend on what He's given us and the promises that He's given us, we can grow in these areas. It's not all on me. God's helping me. But I have to make an effort to grow in my walk with the Lord. So the challenge tonight is to be faithful, to be diligent, that steady, consistent, persistent, repeated effort. Be diligent, be faithful. And don't ever let your guard down. Remember that I got to continuously put effort into growing and walking with the Lord. All right, I'd like for us to close with a song. And I didn't talk to Savannah about this ahead of time, so we're going to talk